very warm welcome to our workshop on dealing with anxiety. My name is John and I will be your host. Before we start, just one or two things I just want to point out. I will be using a fairly comprehensive PowerPoint presentation, and two reasons for that is that most people learn visually, so it's important for them to hear and see, and secondly, it also helps to keep me on track as we have quite a substantial amount of information to cover and relatively limited time. And also, should anybody have any questions or any queries, please feel free to drop me a line at my email address and I will be happy to answer if I can. As I intimated, today's topic is dealing with anxiety. And I'm just going to read something from Our World in Data, some research that was done in 2018. The prevalence of anxiety disorders across the world varies from 2.5 to 7% by country. Globally, an estimated 284 million people experienced an anxiety disorder in 2017, making it the most prevalent mental health or neurodevelopmental disorder. And that's quite significant via the large amount of people who have been diagnosed with a disorder that does not only refer to those who experience anxiety from time to time, but those who actually have been diagnosed with the disorder as such. In other words, those who required some kind of psychological, psychiatric, or medical intervention. And that makes anxiety the most prevalent mental health disorder worldwide. We're going to look at some of the causes of anxiety and some of the symptoms, and then we're going to look at some practical applications of how we can deal with anxiety. I'm coming from the premise of having spent a number of years working in mental health, and also my personal journey in dealing with anxiety for most of my life. So I'm going to be sharing some clinical facts with you and also along the lines of my personal experience. Just something else I want to point out that's really important. Whatever practical applications we're going to look at today, in other words, tools or techniques that we may be able to use in addressing anxiety, that always goes over and above and in addition to any kind of psychological or medical treatment or therapy that anybody may undergo. This does not by any means replace anything. It's really important to understand. What is anxiety? And we're going to look at how do I know that I have a challenge or that I'm being challenged with an anxiety disorder as compared to maybe just having a day where I'm feeling a little bit anxious. The American Psychological Association states that anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. So not only is the emotion that I feel important, but also the fact that my body is being affected and even changed by the emotion of anxiety that I'm feeling. There is an impact on bodily function, and there is an impact on what actually takes place in my body physically. People with anxiety disorders usually have recurring intrusive thoughts or concerns. They may avoid certain situations out of worry. They may also have physical symptoms such as sweating, trembling, dizziness, or a rapid heart rate. So if anybody can relate to any of these ongoing symptoms, and again, it's not just a once-off or now and again, but this is on a fairly regular basis. If anybody experiences these symptoms that have a negative impact on the quality of life, chances are that there may be an anxiety disorder that may need to be addressed. We're going to look at a 5-minute video that explains a bit more about some of the causes and some of the symptoms of anxiety.
Say you've got a huge presentation in front of all your colleagues. You're nervous. You've got quite a bit of stress leading up to the presentation. That stress is completely normal, and really probably useful in certain situations since it can make you more alert and careful. After the presentation's over, you feel the stress start to fade away, right? Well, for 3% of the population, the stress doesn't go away, and maybe that stress isn't even brought on by a specific event, and it's always just sort of there. Either way, at this point, it's considered to be anxiety. That anxiety might get worse over time and cause things like chest pains or nightmares. Sometimes the anxiety is so severe that it causes someone to be anxious about leaving the house or doing everyday things, like going to work or school. This anxiety might be a sign of generalized anxiety disorder, sometimes shortened to GAD. GAD is characterized by excessive, persistent, and unreasonable anxiety about everyday things like money, family, work, and relationships. Even sometimes the thought of getting through the day causes anxiety. If the anxiety is persistent, then it doesn't seem to go away. If it's excessive, it's usually more than someone else might feel, and if it's unreasonable, they probably shouldn't have a reason to feel anxious about it. People who have GAD might even understand that their anxieties are excessive and unreasonable, but they feel it's out of their control and don't quite know how to stop it. People with severe GAD might be completely debilitated and have trouble with the simplest daily activities, or they might be only mildly affected and might be able to function socially and hold down a job. Sometimes the feelings might worsen or improve over time. In addition to having feelings of worries and anxiety, other symptoms include edginess and restlessness, difficulty concentrating or feeling like the mind just goes blank, and also irritability. And these psychological symptoms can also lead to physical manifestations of symptoms, like digestive problems from eating more or eating less. They might also have muscle aches and soreness from carrying tension in their muscles. Finally, difficulty sleeping is a really common symptom that can have a serious impact on physical well-being since the body's not resting. And this can lead to issues of chronic fatigue. Although the decision that someone's worry is excessive and unreasonable has a subjective quality, diagnosing GAD is aided by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5. This manual gives a list of criteria to meet in order to be diagnosed with GAD. First, the excessive worry and anxiety has to have been present for more days than not over the course of 6 months. In other words, a person should have the symptoms of excess or unreasonable worry on 90 or more days out of 180 days. Generally, people can't quantify or track their feelings in that way. So again, this is meant to offer a general guideline, right? Okay, second, the person finds it hard to control their anxiety, meaning that they have a hard time calming themselves or self-soothing to help themselves regain control over their feelings. Third, an adult must have 3 or more of the symptoms listed previously. In children, though, typically defined as school age, so between 6 and about 18 years old, only 1 symptom is needed for the diagnosis of GAD. Another criteria is that the anxiety causes impairment in important daily activities like school or work. For example, they might miss deadlines or find it difficult to even go to work because of their symptoms. Fifth, the symptoms are not attributable to the physiologic effects of drugs or medication, or due to a medical condition like hyperthyroidism, which creates an excess of thyroid hormone, which can sometimes cause symptoms of anxiety and worry. Finally, their anxiety isn't better explained by another mental disorder, like social phobia or panic disorder. Just like a lot of other mental disorders, it's unclear exactly why some individuals develop generalized anxiety disorder, but it's thought to be a combination of genetic and environmental factors, as it seems to run in families. It also has been shown to be twice as prevalent in females than in males. Treating GAD, like many mental disorders, may involve psychotherapy, medication, or a combination of the two. If it's psychotherapy, cognitive behavior therapy has been effective since it teaches the patient to think and behave in different ways, and react differently to situations that would usually cause anxiety and worry. Medications like benzodiazepines or antidepressants might be prescribed as well. Benzodiazepines are a type of psychoactive drug that have a relaxing and calming effect. Antidepressants might also be prescribed, like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, which regulate the serotonin levels in the brain and help elevate mood. Even though both medications and cognitive behavior therapy have similar effectiveness in the short term, cognitive behavior therapy has major advantages over medication in the long term, due to unwanted effects of the medication like tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal.
So hopefully by now there is a better understanding with regards to the fact that there's a difference between somebody who experiences anxiety from time to time or who feel a bit anxious and someone who has the condition of an anxiety disorder that may need to be addressed. So it's really important to understand the difference between the two. We're going to look at how anxiety impacts the various parts of my makeup. My body, first of all, I may be experiencing fatigue, that's tiredness without any specific reason. It may be a lingering, ongoing feeling of tiredness and fatigue and listlessness. Headaches is another symptom of anxiety. Nagging, lingering, ongoing headaches that sometimes don't even respond to medication. There's taut muscles, tensed muscles, because the person who experiences anxiety, in particular an anxiety disorder, always feels tensed and almost hypervigilant sometimes, always on the lookout, almost looking for threats and danger in a sense. It may be a bit over-dramatized, but that very often is what the person with an anxiety disorder experiences. There can also be skin irritations, and that will be the result of some of the electrochemical processes in the body that is the result of the condition, and we'll look a bit more at that. Frequent infections. The person maybe will develop an infection, and that infection tends to linger, doesn't really heal. And one of the reasons is that ongoing stress or ongoing anxiety has a negative impact on some of the bodily functions, and it also interferes with the body's ability to heal itself. And constricted breathing. The person battles to breathe. They either hyperventilate at times or they just breathe very shallowly, but either way there is a battle or a negative experience with regards to breathing. Let's look at emotions. There's a loss of confidence because a person feels on guard all the time, feels the need to watch out all the time, so they feel threatened very often. And for the most part, there is no real concrete or visible threat or reason to feel that way. There are feelings of apprehension, fear, in other words, negative expectations, or there may be indifference. There's a sense of disconnect. There's a sense of I don't really care, almost a lack of emotion in a sense. Very often there's depression, the feeling of being low, feeling down, feeling sad, or there's irritability, just a lack of ability to cope with certain things, and what may have been easy for me to deal with before now becomes more problematic. I'm triggered, I become more frustrated. And insomnia, although insomnia is not an emotion, but obviously a lack of sleep can have a very direct impact on the way that I feel. I want to go to mind. There's constant worrying going on. There's constant thinking about what if, how am I going to deal with it if things go wrong. There's a focus on negativity. There's indecision, and that is very often the result of fear of the future, fear of making the wrong choices, the wrong decisions. So the individual will procrastinate, will put things off. There's a lot of negativity. It is very difficult to be solution focused. It's very difficult to look at positivity. So the person is more focused on what is going wrong. There's foggy thinking because the cognitive ability of the brain is being impaired as a result of the large amount of stress hormones being released in the brain because of the constant negative focus and the feelings of anxiety or fear that follow. Hasty decisions, where a person may make decisions without thinking of consequences, without thinking things through. There's a rush, and there's impaired judgment. Again, the inability to think clearly about a situation, the inability to evaluate. And again, that is a result of cognitive impairment as a result of stress hormones in the brain. The behavior that could sometimes lead to substance abuse, either drugs or alcohol, where the person is looking for some kind of relief, or some kind of escape, and they may be more inclined to experiment. There's loss of appetite. The person doesn't feel like eating, is not interested in food, and that again is the result of some of the biochemical processes within the body. They tend to be accident prone, and that one of the reasons for that is they tend to be more careless, they tend to not pay attention, and also because they tend to focus more on the negative. They tend to be restless, they can't sit still, they walk around all the time, they may be fidgety, they need to move around all the time because of this feeling of being unsettled and on guard all the time. There are feelings of loneliness because very often they find it difficult to relate to others. They find it very difficult to enjoy other people's company because of the negative frame of mind that they find themselves in. And again, insomnia, where they really battle to sleep, they either cannot sleep or they've got interrupted sleep patterns, and that eventually or over long term will have a very negative effect on the general sense of well-being. A very important principle to understand with regards to the biochemical or neurological process of anxiety, if I can put it that way. Fear or anxiety results from the release of stress hormones, for example, adrenaline, cortisol, or CRFs in the brain. And the initial purpose of these chemicals is to provide clarity and energy. So the person with an anxiety disorder, for the most part, finds themselves in a negative headspace, a negative state of mind, focusing on negativity, and that causes a lot of stress hormones to be released in the brain. And as I said, that the purpose of these stress hormones is to help me to think clearly, maybe energize me when if I need to take any kind of action with regards to facing threats or facing challenges. And over time, these stress hormones will have more of a negative reaction as opposed to providing clarity and energizing me. It slows down cognitive function because there's an oversupply of these hormones in the brain. There's also a process that is referred to as hyperfrontality that may take place. And because the reason for that is the oversupply of stress hormones in the brain as a result of the over-focusing on negative causes the brain to go into survival mode. And the moment the brain goes into survival mode, that implies that the emotional midbrain and the survival reptilian brain causes the person to go into survival mode, causing the thinking, rational part of the brain to go offline, if I can put it that way. And the reason being, if I need to make quick decisions, if I need to act quickly because there's a threat, there may not be any time to think. And this is all exaggerated for the person with an anxiety disorder. So as I said earlier on, there may not be any physical or realistic threats. It's all processes and feelings and experiences going on inside of the person. And that causes an exacerbation of their negative state of mind, and it causes them to experience things more negatively. The three main causes for generalized anxiety disorder, as referred to in the video, are genetics. And genetics meaning I was born with certain predispositions or certain organic malfunction, maybe in the brain, or chemical imbalance. It's something I'm born with, and that contributes towards my vulnerability to anxiety disorders. And then there's brain chemistry. There's either an oversupply or an undersupply of certain chemicals. And the brain chemicals essentially can be divided into two main groups, the so-called feel-good chemicals and the so-called stress hormones. Well, not so-called, they are stress hormones. And the feel chemicals make me feel confident, happy, satisfied, and the stress hormones makes me feel alert, on guard, focused on possible threats. And when there is an imbalance in the chemistry, it causes feelings of anxiety, feelings of fear. And then environmental factors, and that may include maybe for children growing up in abusive families or emotional neglect, or growing up in environments where there is a lot of danger, maybe war zones or crime-riddled areas, and all these factors in combination contribute towards the person's vulnerability or risk for anxiety disorders, and particularly generalized anxiety disorder. Some of the risk factors that puts the person at risk, and we've already referred to genetic predisposition and brain chemistry. And the family background is also very important, apart from just the person maybe having grown up in a negative family environment where there may have been abuse or neglect. It also seems to be heredity in certain sense. Many people who suffer from or experience anxiety disorders, it seems to run in the family. It seems to be generational, and there are various reasons for that. And the two main reasons could be that the person has inherited some of the genetic predispositions, or they have internalized certain patterns, certain beliefs, or hypervigilance because of the negative environments that they may have grown up in, and they tend to repeat those patterns. There's also social influence, what happens from the outside world, and particularly in areas, as I said, where there may be, it may be a war zone, maybe high crime levels, certain threats. The person is impacted by what goes on around them, and that over time has an impact on their thinking and an impact on the brain chemistry, and ultimately an impact on brain function, and that could be contribute towards their risk for anxiety disorders. And also lifestyle factors. Now, people who do not eat healthy, people who never exercise, people who have a lot of stress, and everybody has stress, but different people deal with stress in different ways, and we're going to look at some of the practical ways that we could be dealing with stress. So lifestyle factors, lifestyle choices ultimately also play a very important role. So these factors in combination would contribute towards a person's vulnerability or predisposition towards anxiety disorder. There's never any one particular factor. One particular factor may be more, may weigh heavier than other factors, but there has to be a combination of various factors that will contribute towards the person's predisposition. And that genetic predisposition could also be personality. Some people maybe are more introvert, they tend to keep things more to themselves, while others are more extrovert, they can talk and it's easier for them to deal with things. So these are all very important factors. There are different types of anxiety disorders. So again, if you can relate to any of these, and you can also relate to some of the symptoms or experiences that are continuous over a period of time, you may be somebody who is experiencing an anxiety disorder. There is generalized anxiety disorder, and this is a person who just generally finds it difficult to cope with challenges in life, that finds it difficult to deal with stress, finds it difficult to deal with negativity or threats, in other words, coping mechanisms. And family matters, work-related matters, financial issues have a very, very strong negative impact on them and affects their sense of well-being, and they experience a lot of fear and anxiety as a result. Panic disorders, where panic or fear gets triggered for no known reason, unexpectedly, and it may be something that may not affect somebody else, but it affects the individual person. They may be in crowds and all of a sudden they have a huge fear, or they may be in traffic and feel completely overwhelmed. And as I said, these are triggers or symptoms that occur randomly for no apparent reason and come and go very, very quickly. Agoraphobia, the fear of open spaces, or very often just the fear of going outside. And that would be the result of the person having an anxiety disorder where they tend to isolate, they tend to keep to themselves, they tend to stay indoors because that is the only way they can feel safe and secure. And the moment they go outside of what is familiar to them, they can be overwhelmed by feelings of fear. So leaving home to go shopping, or leaving home to go to work, or just going outside for that matter, any kind of open space where there isn't a sense of specific security and safety can have a very negative impact on them. Social anxiety, the inability to relate to people, to feel that people are watching them, to feel that people are criticizing them, to feel that people are judging them. And again, a lot of this very often is unwarranted. There are no visible evidence of the reality of these fears. It's all the story inside the person's head, really, that creates this reality, and that is all the result of the disorder. And then specific phobias, maybe over-dramatic or exaggerated phobias of spiders or insects, or again, certain things that may not really affect the majority of people. People with anxiety disorders are hugely impacted by these things, and very often in an irrational manner. And again, a combination of all these factors would be an indication of the level of the potential anxiety disorder that the person may be experiencing or suffering from. In the video, reference was made to CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy, and it was stated that CBT remains one of the most effective forms of therapy over and above medication, maybe where it is needed. So I just want to run through just the basic principles of what CBT is all about. And the premise is that we think a certain way about what we're facing, what we're experiencing in a challenge, in a situation, any interaction with a person. So whatever the event, whatever the circumstance, whatever the situation is, before we can experience the situation, circumstance, or event, we have to first think a certain way about this situation. In other words, there is a narrative that plays out in our heads. There is a story that we tell ourselves, and very often that story or that thinking in response to the situation is the result of previous experiences, previous memories that are being triggered, or filters that we've developed throughout our lives that cause us to interpret certain things a certain way. You may have two people going through very similar situations or circumstances, and they will have very different narratives or stories that they tell themselves about what is happening. Is because, and the reason for that is because we have different filters that we've developed throughout our lives that determine how we interpret and how we process the situations that we're facing. The thoughts always create emotions, and emotions are always the result of biochemical processes within our nervous system in response to our thinking. So I'm facing a situation, I'm telling myself a very negative story about the situation. I may be stuck in traffic and I may be saying to myself, this always happens. I'm late for work. What's going to happen now? I'm going to get into trouble. I'm so sick and tired of this. I can't do this anymore. And that story just compounds and compounds, and the negative words become more and more. And the more negative our narrative or our thinking process becomes, the more stress hormones are being released in our nervous system, in various parts of the brain and body. And those stress hormones cause the feelings of stress, the feelings of anxiety, the feelings of fear, the feelings of frustration. So the thoughts is what we think affects how we feel and act, and the emotions are the direct result of the thoughts, and the emotions are what we feel affects how we think and act. So you've got a constant cycle, or this constant feedback loop. So I'm thinking negative thoughts that makes me feel very negative. I feel very negative, that feeds back into my negative thinking, and my negative thinking feeds back into emotion, and I've created this feedback loop. And then there is my behavior, or the results. My behavior is always the result of what I'm thinking and feeling. So my behavior may be, in extreme cases, if I'm in traffic, road rage, or acting irresponsibly, and that is the result of because what we do affects what we think and feel in turn again. So you've got this cycle going, and the main cause for the cycle is the thinking. There's not much I can do about my emotions. I can't just merely stop the emotions. There's also not that much I can do about the behavior. I can't necessarily to stop the behavior. It is imperative that I go back to the thinking, that I go back to the narrative, that I go back to the story. Is there a way in which I can change the story? Because if I can change or tweak the story, the narrative, the thinking, I will be able to impact the emotions. I will at least be able to cause a reduction in stress hormones that will relieve my negative emotions, and I could even move from there maybe to change the story to something more positive that may contribute to more feel-good chemicals being released, and I could feel better, and that will have a direct impact on my behavior. What does this have to do with an anxiety disorder? Well, an anxiety disorder is a combination of all these. The person with an anxiety disorder is inclined to be stuck in negative thoughts, and as a result experience negative emotions, and as a result be stuck in unresourceful or self-sabotaging behavior that keeps the cycle going. And something really important I want to point out, whatever therapy I may be undergoing, whatever medication I may be undergoing, until I find a way to address the thinking that causes the feeling, that causes the behavior, my treatment protocol or modality that I may be undergoing may be rendered ineffective as long as I'm stuck in negative thoughts and feelings. If I can find a way to address the thinking, and I can, as a result, find a way to address my feeling and improve the behavior, it will make whatever treatment I may be undergoing and whatever medication I may be using more effective. Really important to understand that. Imperative, I'm going to reiterate something I've said a number of times now, and it's really, really important that we understand this. The primary causes for any and all conditions in our body and mind are bioelectrical and biochemical processes that facilitate function in the brain and the body. So any condition that I may have, any disorder that I may have, any disease that I may have, any impairment that I may have, is the result of bioelectrical and biochemical processes. The bioelectrical processes cause chemicals to be released in my system, and those chemicals feed back into the electrical processes, and should there be a problem in either one, there will be a problem in the processes within my body, my brain, the nervous system, and that will lead or exacerbate whatever negative condition I may be experiencing. And again, imperative that we understand that a healthy body plus a healthy mind equals a happy life. What causes the bioelectrical and biochemical processes? Thought. I'm going to say that again. What causes the bioelectrical and biochemical processes in my body and nervous system? Thought. Thought remains the primary catalyst or the primary cause for any bioelectrical and biochemical processes in the body. The way that I think about things causes the way that I feel about it. And that is all the result of these processes inside me that can either be empowering or disempowering, positive or negative. It can either serve me or sabotage me. And again, I want to repeat what I said earlier, until I find ways to address the thinking and the emotion, any other attempt will remain futile. So we're going to look at what we can do to address that primary cause or the primary catalyst that causes the way that we feel, that contributes towards any potential disorder that we may be having. There are neurotransmitters that are constantly working in the brain and the body, and neurotransmitters are the chemicals that are being released in the brain. The feel-good chemicals, as I intimated earlier, are the stress hormones. And we're going to quickly look at the various neurotransmitters and the role that they play in the various states that we experience. The main neurotransmitters we're going to look at are dopamine, and that is the happiness or the feel-good chemical. When I do something that I enjoy, it's because the brain is releasing dopamine because I'm thinking happy thoughts at the time. Serotonin is the well-being, calmness, satisfaction chemical. So if I do something that makes me feel good about myself, there's a sense of satisfaction afterwards, it is because there was a release of serotonin, and that was the result of me thinking thoughts of well-being and satisfaction. Oxytocin is called the bonding chemical or the connection chemical, and that is the chemical that we feel when we spend time with people we care about or people we love. And the reason why we feel that sense of connection is because there is a release of oxytocin, and that is because we are thinking thoughts about the person we're spending with, how much we love them, how much we care about them, and that creates the experience. There is noradrenaline, and noradrenaline is the chemical stress hormone that makes me feel alert, makes me feel alive, helps me to look forward to things. And then there is adrenaline, the stress hormone that energizes me, helps me to be alert and awake and aware in order to take the necessary action should I face any kind of threat or danger. And these neurotransmitters and stress hormones basically rule our lives. They determine whatever state we may be experiencing. An oversupply of dopamine can cause at least the symptoms of schizophrenia, and there may be various reasons why there is an oversupply of dopamine. It may be a neurological disorder, or it may be the result of substance abuse, but an imbalance and oversupply can cause schizophrenia. An undersupply or a shortage or a lack of dopamine causes feelings of anxiety, and again, it could be the result of a neurological impairment, or it may be the result of substance use. So lack of dopamine causes anxiety. Happiness is an adequate or sufficient supply of serotonin, a sense of well-being. I feel good about myself, I feel content, I feel satisfied, and there's not an oversupply or an undersupply. Enough serotonin makes me feel happy. Depression is an undersupply or lack of both dopamine and serotonin. So I feel unhappy and I feel unsatisfied, and that causes me to feel depressed. Feeling love is an equal supply, adequate supply of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. So I feel happy to be with a person. There's a sense of contentment and there's a feeling of connectedness. Makes me feel and experience love. Fight or flight, should there be a risk, should there be a threat, is a large or oversupply of noradrenaline and adrenaline, and there may be a need for there to be such a large amount of those chemicals because my life may be at risk and I may need to take swift action. So the bottom line is it is important that we find ways and means to maintain healthy levels of these various neurotransmitters and transmitters in order for us to experience a positive state. So do things that make me feel happy, that I enjoy. Do things that make me feel a sense of contentment and satisfaction and make me feel good about myself. Connect with people that I can feel a sense of connection, a sense of bonding with. Do things that I can really make me feel alive, and that could be sport or any kind of activity that I can really look forward to, and I feel a sense of euphoria or adrenaline, that and that could be something like, for some people, extreme sports or activities that really makes me feel a sense of excitement. There are two very important and powerful and effective practices with regards to addressing anxiety in particular. The first one is meditation and mindfulness exercises. And what that does is it increases serotonin levels within my brain and my nervous system, and that brings about feelings of contentment and well-being. And apart from that, it also helps me to become more centered and focused onto the present moment. And the more I focus onto the present moment, the more my feelings of anxiety become reduced, because my anxiety can be because I'm focusing on negative memories from the past or uncertainties about the future. So focusing on the present moment brings a sense of relief, and more importantly, it causes an increase in serotonin. And there are a number of resources on the internet available if you want to do some research on effective meditation and mindfulness exercises, particularly for anxiety. And then physical exercise increases endorphin levels, and endorphins is a neurotransmitter that makes them feel a natural high. I'm sure you've heard about the phrase runner's high. People who run a lot almost become addicted to that natural high that they experience while they're running, and it's because of the endorphin release in the brain. So those are two very powerful and effective practices that anybody can develop that will really help them to address anxiety disorders. I'm going to start wrapping up with some practical applications with regards to how we can address our narrative or the story that we're telling ourselves. And again, a reminder, my experience is created by the story I tell myself about what I am facing. Less about what is happening, more about what I am thinking. And that is what creates whatever the experience is, and in this particular context of anxiety. So what is your story? How are you describing the situation that you are facing? We're going to look at a tool that will help to reframe the narrative, that will help me to change the story that I'm telling myself that may be contributing towards anxiety in this particular situation. There's something that is referred to as the 10-10 communication game, and it was developed by a neuroscientist called Dr. Mark Waldman. And he makes the statement that for most people, when they face a negative or a challenging situation, they are inclined to tell themselves a long story filled with negative words about what is going on. And that long story filled with negative words ultimately trigger huge amounts of stress hormones in the nervous system that create negative emotions. And as we looked at earlier on, we create this feedback loop or the cycle of negative story, negative emotions, and ultimately negative behavior. So what can I do to relieve the negative emotions that I'm feeling or the anxiety that I'm feeling? And why that is important is, as long as I'm stuck in my negative story, as long as I'm experiencing strong negative emotions, I am unable to think clearly, I'm unable to find solutions. So I want to find a way to address the story so that I can reduce the level of the negative emotions so that I can become more clear-minded and find some solutions. And this principle is based on, I'm going to retell the story in no more than 10 words or as close as possible to 10 words. And I am going to use one word per finger. So let's use an example. I have a very close friend who, for some reason, treated me very badly out of the blue. He really, really spoke to me in very unfriendly and almost rude, in a rude way, and really hurt my feelings. And my story is, how could Chris do this to me? We've been friends for so many years. I've done so much for him. We've had such a good relationship. And this morning he spoke to me like I've never been spoken to before. What have I done wrong? What is going on here? I'm so disappointed. I feel so hurt. I now blame Chris for the way that I feel, but what Chris did only contributed around about 10% to my experience. The other 90% is the result of my narrative, the story that I'm telling myself, with all these negative words, creating negative emotions, and I'm feeling very disempowered and very anxious. So to get out of that pattern, out of that rut, it may be very difficult to all of a sudden start to think positive thoughts because I've got the momentum of negative thoughts going. So it'll be easier for me to first reframe the narratives into a more in more clinical terms, and that will reduce the level of stress chemicals being released into my nervous system, and I will feel better. So let's reframe the story. 1 word per finger, 10 fingers. So first word, first finger, second word, second finger. That is how we're going to do it. This morning, Chris said something to me. I felt hurt. That's exactly what happened. If you test this on yourself, immediately you will experience less anger, less frustration, less anxiety, simply by tweaking the story, by reducing the number of words to at least as close as possible to 10. I feel better. The moment I start to feel better, I become more clear-minded, and I can now look for a way in how to address the situation more effectively. So that cycle of the thought, the emotion, the behavior. I can make this even better. Reduce this to 5. 5 words, 5 fingers. Reframe the story to feel even less anger or frustration or sadness. This morning, Chris said something. That's all that happened. Chris said something to me. How I experienced it was the result of the meaning that I gave what happened, the story I told myself. Now, am I being in denial? Am I making things to be better than they really are? Well, that's not really the point. What I'm doing here is I'm doing whatever I can to get myself into a more empowering state so that I can behave in a more empowering way and maybe find a way to address the situation. And this is a very powerful tool to use when I feel overwhelmed with anxiety, when I feel overcome by situations. And to remind myself the reason I feel this way is around 10% because of the situation I'm facing, and 90% because of the story or the narrative that is going on in my mind. So let me use this tool, let me reduce the story to 10 words, 10 fingers, and even reduce it further to 5 words, 5 fingers. And that way I will be able to reduce the stress levels in my brain, in my nervous system. I will feel better, and I'll be able to address whatever the situation is that I'm facing. We've come to the end of the presentation, and as I intimated in the beginning, if there's anybody with any questions or queries, anything they would like to ask about, or even maybe inquiries with regards to online coaching, you are more than welcome to drop me a line at john.ttklife@gmail.com. john.ttklife@gmail.com. I wish you an amazing journey as you continue to explore ways and means to grow, to develop, and to live the life you desire and deserve.